Can you see it?
Yes, sir, please go ahead.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, there you go. As I said, there are a number of perceptions today about India-Russia relations. Central Asia, of course, I'll come to a little later. But if you look at India-Russia relations, a lot of things have happened since 2000. India has diversified its network of relations very strongly. And we now have a different standing in the world than we had in the year 2000, very clearly. But over this period, perceptions of Russia have changed a lot. And I think we need to first see what are the general perceptions which one comes across about Russia in the public mind these days. One, a lot of people will tell you that, today Russia is politically and militarily weak. It's not a superpower anymore. It's under pressure from various countries. And then, of course, various stories about what President Putin is and about the democracy in Russia, etc., etc., etc. Two, Russia was a bulwark of political support for us in India during the entire Cold War period. But today the feeling is that, look, you have a network of relationships that don't need Russia to support you. Three, from Russia's perspective, you feel India is no longer a priority for Russia. Today you see Russia hobnobbing with Pakistan and a very close alliance with China. So the general feeling is that India is not a priority for Russia. Four, that we don't have that many opportunities in Russia either. I mean, the feeling is that now the way in which the Russian economy has been battered by sanctions and the way in which Russia is under pressure from the West and the way in which Russian business operates, there's not really any opportunities for Indian business in Russia. So these are the broad perceptions that one comes across. I'm not saying that it's universal. I'm not saying that it is there among the policymakers. It certainly isn't. But there is a public perception about Russia, which to a greater or lesser extent includes these elements. Now let's look at where we are, where we came from with Russia and where we're going to, therefore. So if you look at the period of the Cold War, I think there are no two views about it. India-Russia relations were very, very strong. It was India-Soviet Union at that time, Indian-Soviet relations. And it was based on a very strong political, military, economic support as well as cultural affinities. So if you look at it, Soviet Union actually supported India at very critical points on the international arena. 6 vetoes they wielded in the UN Security Council. 2 of them were in Jammu and Kashmir at very important points when, if the vetoes had not been exercised, our position on Jammu and Kashmir in the world, in the UN system, would have been damaged very greatly. In 1971, there were 3 vetoes that the Soviet Union exercised during the India-Pakistan war at very critical stages once again, which if those Security Council resolutions had gone through, our advance in the war would have been very greatly impacted. And then, of course, there was one in 1962 on Goa, where to enable, to prevent stopping of Indian troops from entering Goa. So we've had a number of instances where strong political support has been received from Russia, not only there, in other international fora as well. Defense, at a time when there was the famous US tilt towards Pakistan, and India signed a treaty with Russia on the basis of which, or with the Soviet Union once again, I should say, on the basis of which the close relationship included the arming of India. So weapons and equipment, advanced weapons and equipment of that time, to build up India's military strength, we owe it to the Soviet Union at that time. Newly independent India also received considerable economic assistance and infrastructure building in a whole range of heavy engineering, machine building, infrastructure, the industrial infrastructure, which Russia and the Russian allies, which are Poland, Czech Republic, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, and others, also participated in the industrial infrastructure building in India. And all this created a number of affinities, cultural affinities, which actually had a great impact. Educational, a number of Russian textbooks in our scientific and technological institutions Many of us, when we were studying in university, we studied from textbooks, the Russian maths and engineering textbooks. Very cheap, very good. So there was a whole range of interactions that India and the Soviet Union developed, which stood us in very good stead during the entire Cold War period. But, you know, as they say in the stock market, past performance is no guarantee of future returns. I think it's equally true in international affairs. The past cannot justify the present and the future. You need to see what is the reality today, and do objective realities today justify the strategic partnership that we say that we have with Russia? Have the question that I talking about the public perception. Have new international equations actually changed Russia's perspectives? From the Russian perspective and from India, where does Russia fit into India's strategic objectives? I think these are very valid questions, and these are questions that we need to answer effectively if we have to justify the India-Russia relationship. So, go to 2000, when President Putin first assumed office. The India-Russia relationship was renewed at that time, the post-Cold War India-Russia relationship as opposed to India-Soviet relationship. And the two countries actually signed a new strategic partnership agreement, building on history, but it was based on a bilateral understanding of political support. It was based on President Putin, in fact, came to India in October 2000, immediately after, a few months after he'd taken office, and very clearly spelled out the importance that India had in Russia's strategic map, the support that Russia will give to India's positions on issues like Jammu and Kashmir and other areas of core concern. So, and of course, commitment to India's defense strengthening. And that actually started a period of very strong defense partnership between India and Russia, which across the range of equipment and weaponry of our armed forces, Russia has been supplying to us since then. It has been clearly the extending maximum technology support to our armed forces. No country has actually transferred so far as much technology as Russia has done in the defense field. And actually, if you look at it even today, after a lot of diversification of our defense acquisition, Russian, Soviet equipment and weaponry still constitute something like 60 to 70% of our armed forces. It's an extraordinary figure. It's being diluted, but it is still pretty dominant. And we have entered into new forms of research and development and Make in India. The BrahMos missile system, of course, is a joint venture between India and Russia, a very successful one. More recently, assault rifles are being manufactured under a Make in India model in one of our ordnance factories. So there are these ongoing defense collaborations that exist. Nuclear energy, after the sanctions that were imposed on India post-1998 nuclear tests, Russia was the one country that said that it will continue civil nuclear cooperation with India. And of course, after the Indo-US nuclear deal, the landmark deal by which the US got the international community to open up civil nuclear cooperation with India, Russia came in an even bigger way. In fact, Russia is the only foreign country today in India collaborating in nuclear energy. It is in Kudankulam in Tamil Nadu. We are actually at the moment committed to something like 12 units. 2 units are operating, 2 more units are under construction, and more are on way. And you know, Russian assistance comes with equipment, technology, and also credit, fairly low interest credit for the hydrocarbons. Russia is, of course, a hydrocarbon superpower, and we have a huge need for hydrocarbons. Indian companies have invested something in the region of $15 billion in oil and gas fields in Russia. And again, it's a huge natural resource source for us, which we have not fully exploited, but that is an opportunity that exists between India and Russia. The other aspect, the broader strategic aspect of India-Russia relations lies in multipolarity. Now, you know that after the Cold War, after a brief unipolar moment, there is then this striving for creation of multipolar world order. What it really means is that countries, medium and large countries, are all jostling for space in the international order, trying to maximize their room for maneuver, trying to see how they can secure as many of their political and economic aspirations as possible. This is part of the jostling for position in a multipolar world, in a world order, in a post-Cold War order in the making, you might call it. And there, it is very important that Russia is as well. It's not a superpower anymore. Russia is as well looking for a place in the multipolar world order. It's very important that you maintain relations with other countries which are seeking to maximize their room for maneuver. So the other relationship with Russia is important in that perspective as well. And that is how, you know, we got into this multilateral organization called BRICS, the dialogue, the Russia-India-China dialogue, and more recently the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which I will come to, of course, a little later. So relations with Russia, other than all the other specific issues that I mentioned, are also part of the relationships that you maintain in a multipolar world order to retain your strategic autonomy so that you're not entirely putting your eggs in another basket. This is not non-alignment. Non-alignment died with the Cold War. This is strategic autonomy. And forgetting about all others, if you look at a map, eventually geography determines foreign policy. And if you look at a map, the justification for India-Russia relations is there on the map. Here is this huge country which straddles the Eurasian landmass. It is the neighbor of our extended neighborhood. It neighbors, of course, it's an extended neighbor to the Middle East region, West Asian region, which is very important for us. All its action in those regions actually impact on us. What it does in Afghanistan impacts on us. And very importantly, what it does with China impacts on us. It is the one country with whom Russia and India both share borders, China. And I'll come to that a little later. Russia-China relations are a very important factor in India-Russia relations. And if for nothing else, to keep the Russia-China relations, to prevent Russia-China relations from making Russia act in a manner inimical to our interests, we should maintain relations of a certain intensity with Russia. So, coming back also to other perceptions about Russia, what is its place in the world, what is it, what can it actually do? Let's remember it is still a permanent member of the Security Council, which we are not yet. It is still a nuclear weapon power, and the US recognizes Russia as the only other nuclear weapon power that can threaten its nuclear arsenal. So from a nuclear weapon power, it's not a superpower in any other way, but for nuclear weapons. But it is a superpower in energy. It is, in fact, it has the world's largest proven reserves of natural gas, and it's the largest producer of natural gas. It has the 7th largest proven reserves of oil. It's the 2nd largest, and now I think it has become the largest producer of oil. It has the 3rd largest proven reserves of coal, 6th largest producer. Not known, it is the 4th largest. It has the 4th largest reserves of uranium in the world, and actually Russia controls the processed uranium trade in the world. It has 1/3 of the conversion capacity and 50% of the global enrichment capacity of uranium. Actually, Russia supplies uranium to power plants in the US and power plants in Europe as well. And it has, you know, recently one talks a lot about its political presence in Syria, Iran, Libya, in various ways, its presence in those regions. And finally, again, size matters. Here it is stretching right across from the Pacific Atlantic to the Pacific and across Europe and Asia. Today, in today's Cold War-like situation, the West is actually pressurizing Russia militarily, politically, economically across its borders. But equally, that gives Russia the opportunity to create trouble for them in various different places. So it's not a country that can be taken lightly. It's not dead as yet. So I mean that's the broad message here. But our relations with Russia obviously have a number of modern day challenges. Primary among them is US-Russia relations. You know, over the period from 2000 onwards, when India sustained its strategic partnership with Russia, it also developed relations with the US. The strategic partnership with the US developed. Its relations with China developed, which was fine. They were excellent as long as relations between Russia and the US were functional. But over a period of time, and particularly in the last 6 or 7 years, as US-Russia relations deteriorated very greatly, we are under pressure from the US to dilute our relations with Russia. This has affected most of all in the defense sphere, where most recently the US legislation on CATSA, as it's called, Countering America's Adversaries Through Sanctions Act, applies pressure on India to stop acquiring major arms platforms from Russia. Now, India has since 2000 itself tried to diversify its military acquisitions program because we don't want to be dependent on one country. We want to have access to the best military technologies around the world. We want to be in a position where we can actually choose the technologies that we can get and play off both technology and price between countries. But the prevention of trying to restrict relations with Russia and therefore defense affects us. So this is one of the challenges that we are in constant dialogue with the Americans about. Russia, China. Today's very strong anti-Russia and anti-China position of the US leads to a situation where Russia and China are brought together very closely in what you might call a quasi-alliance even. Not in our interest for obvious reasons. Again, this is a challenge that we have to, so this is what I said earlier, that you need to be working with Russia to make sure that Russia-China does not hurt us, and you need to be somehow taking it up with the US as well to see that they do not dilute our relations with Russia. Now, as I said, our relations with Russia are, besides other reasons, also a peculiar product of geography. And therefore, we cannot afford to completely move away from Russia, because the regional geopolitics will then be against us. So eventually, the third point I mentioned there is the US-Russia-China triangle. Eventually, these relations don't stand on their own. Our relations with Russia are very much a product of the shape, or very much determined by the shape of the US-China-Russia triangle. If US-Russia go further apart, it affects India-Russia relations. If US-China go further apart, it affects India-China relations. If US-China come closer together, it very much affects India-Russia relations and India's relations in various other areas. So eventually, India-Russia relations will be a product of what happens, the shape and the length of the respective sides of the US-China-Russia triangle. One of the things that we have to do, when we are saying that we are diversifying away from Russia in defense, if we have to keep the bilateral relationship vibrant, we have to broad base our cooperation. Today, that is one of the weaknesses in the India-Russia relations. Defense is a very strong component. Hydrocarbons has now come up as an important component. But there are so many other areas of cooperation which are not even touched by sanctions, US sanctions, where we have not actually expanded our economic presence in Russia. A whole range of natural resources that we talked about, which we can actually benefit from. We are a natural resource hungry country. So this is one of the challenges in India-Russia relations, which are still to be met. Then you have, yes, I'll come to the Indo-Pacific just a bit later, but this is one of the areas of India-Russia, potential areas of India-Russia cooperation, which also links up with Central Asia, which is the International North-South Transport Corridor. Now, if you see actually 90% of our trade is by the sea, and therefore the sea lanes become very important for us. But if you see the sea lanes of transport for India, from India to Europe, you've got to go halfway around the world. There is now multimodal trade corridor that we are looking at, which from the west coast of India through Iran by sea, and then Iran by road or rail, and then through Russia into Europe, which will take half the time and cost half the freight. And the other great advantage is it also has spurs to Afghanistan and Central Asia, which I'll come to again. But this is the one link to Central Asia that can greatly strengthen our position there. So this is another area of cooperation with Russia, which we need to be looking at as an opportunity. Reconciling the Indo-Pacific now. Actually, the Indo-Pacific, I must come to, I think I actually removed the slide. You had actually a presentation on the Indo-Pacific earlier, where I'm sure the objectives of India's activities in the Indo-Pacific, the importance of the Indo-Pacific to us, the interaction between India and China and the Indo-Pacific has been brought out very clearly. Now, where does Russia come into it? As of today, Russia considers the Indo-Pacific as an Indo-American construct, as a kind of a military alliance that counters Russia and China. Whereas if you look at it, our objective in the Indo-Pacific is to create some kind of a security equilibrium, which does not contain China, but which basically draws China into a cooperative, a web of cooperative relations, which enables countries to exercise their rights and freedom of navigation, freedom of commercial routes, and so on. We need to get Russia into this because it is equally in Russia's interest. Russia does not need to be China's junior partner in pushing back against the Indo-Pacific. And this was a great initiative that was recently launched by Prime Minister Modi when he attended an India-Russia summit in Vladivostok, where India's interest in the Russian Far East was very clearly articulated, where we actually started work on a maritime corridor from Vladivostok to Chennai. The idea being that Russia as a Pacific power should also join up with like-minded countries to press China to enter into a cooperative arrangement in the Indo-Pacific. It's not something that's going to happen tomorrow or day after, but it's a very important element in the India-Russia cooperation and a challenge for India to draw Russia into the Indo-Pacific. And this is part of what President Putin has tried to talk about, a greater Eurasia, because they also, in their search for a multipolar world, they're looking at how they can draw in the countries of Eurasia into a cooperative enterprise. So the idea of the Indo-Pacific and greater Eurasia joining together is not a completely impossible one. Finally, when we talk about Russia's relations with Pakistan, Russia's relations with China, what Russia is doing in Afghanistan, there are a lot of controversies about it. You say, our friend has now turned against us, etc., etc. I think if you look at the way the world order is developing today, there are no exclusivity of relations. India-Russia relations are not exclusive anymore. I mean, India-US strategic partnership is a very strong partnership and a whole lot of other partnerships. Therefore, in today's world, an alliance is basically a Cold War concept. It's a concept that existed when you had ideological coherence and when you had an existential military threat. Neither of these can be talked about today. Today, relations should be talked about like joint ventures. You share certain interests with the other partner. You do a joint venture to promote those interests jointly, leaving each joint venture partner to forge relations with other countries in whichever way they want, provided only they do not strike at the core interests of the other partner. So if you look at India-US, India-Russia, and other such relationships as joint ventures, you are then in a position to deal with the today's world order in a much more pragmatic way. So this is what I would say. I'll leave the rest for questions questions or comments on Russia. I should get to Central Asia. Now, Central Asia has become an appendage to this subject of India-Russia, but it's a very important subject in its own right. Now, if you look at it, India's Central Asia links go back to something like the 3rd century BC. If you, in fact, before maritime transportation and maritime trade started, India, Central Asia were very closely connected by the Silk Route. So it's right up to something like the 15th century AD, when I think I have a slide that shows this. Now, this is the Silk Route. This is the close linkage that existed between India and Central Asia, and this was not only a trade route. Thoughts and ideas flowed, various initiatives flowed, and in fact, Buddhism went from India through Central Asia to Xinjiang. So we've had a close historical connection with Central Asia, except that with the Cold War, it changed because Central Asia became part of the Soviet Union, and relations with Central Asia became subsumed in India-USSR relations. In 1990, when there was a turmoil, when everybody was trying to seek a new moorings for their political and economic, international political and economic relations, we didn't really have that much interaction with Central Asia. After that, the problem between India and Central Asia was fundamentally that because of the political and geographical borders between which Pakistan and Afghanistan placed between India and Central Asia, our connection, our land connection with Central Asia got disrupted. And that really was the reason why relations with Central Asia did not really develop as vibrantly during these last couple of decades as they should have. But why? We once again come back to geography. Why Central Asia? If you look at the map, here is a country here is a region which borders some of our most difficult neighbors and near neighbors. If you look at it, Central Asia, just a tiny sliver of land separates Central Asia from Pakistan occupied Kashmir, Afghanistan, Iran. So quite obviously, when you have a difficult neighborhood and when you have difficult neighbors with your difficult relations with your neighbors become very important. So Central Asia has an importance for that reason. But there is more than that. So one is that it offers tremendous trade and investment opportunities as well. It's again an area which is rich in natural resources, and the sanctions that apply to Russia do not apply to Central Asia. So there are a number of opportunities that Central Asia offers, which we need to be looking at more carefully. And this is something that was done over a period of time. There has been a few initiatives that were launched in the early 2000s, an international cooperation agreement with which Kazakhstan promoted. We participated in it. There was a Connect Central Asia initiative. But the relations really surged after 2015, when Prime Minister Modi, while returning from the BRICS summit in Ufa, actually visited each of the five, or just before and just after, visited each of the 5 Central Asian countries. And that has given a new direction to relations with Central Asia, and added to the fact that in 2016, we joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which actually includes Russia, China, and the Central Asian countries. In addition to that, sorry. Central Asia lies between Russia and China. And we talked about the dynamics of the Russia-China relationship. What is important is, in fact, in the beginning, it was Russia that wanted us into the Shanghai Cooperation Organization as a kind of a counter to China. That situation has changed a lot, but what we now need to do is to see that we need to see how Russia-China dynamics plays out in Central Asia. Central Asia, how Russia and China divided up their roles in Central Asia was that Russia was supposed to look after the political and security aspects, and China, the economic cooperation. That is gradually changing with the Belt and Road Initiative and other Chinese presence in Central Asia. Chinese influence in Central Asia is increasing rapidly, and Russian influence, while still there, is diluting gradually. Again, this is an area of concern to us, which we need to be present in to see to what extent we can counter. Now, in that respect, Central Asia itself is keen on an Indian presence because Central Asia itself would like to expand its room for maneuver between Russia and China, and the introduction of India is very welcome to them. We need to make sure, therefore, that we use this SCO to upgrade our political presence in Central Asia. We need to develop, for too long, we've looked at Central Asia through a Russian prism because they were part of the USSR. We need to separately target Central Asian countries, understand their distinctive cultures, their distinctive language, their distinctive ethos, because they have developed this over a period of time since their independence in 1990. There is a Eurasian Economic Union which Russia has, in which most of the Central Asian countries are involved. That is another vehicle. India is negotiating a free trade agreement with the Eurasian Economic Union. That's another vehicle by which we can promote trade and investment with Central Asia. But when you come down to it, the key is connectivity, as in everything else. And we come back to the North-South transport corridor, because the North-South transport corridor gives you the short, efficient, and effective link to Central Asia, if we can complete that. And what we need to do, by the way, India has already built terminals in Chabahar port in Iran. We are committed to building a rail link up to Zahedan in the north of Iran. Central Asian countries themselves are very, very keen to build on that. And this is something that we don't often understand. We talk about our connectivity with Central Asia. What we don't realize is that Central Asia is as keen to develop that connectivity in order to give them access to the sea independent of China and Russia. So if you really look at it, if you look at Uzbekistan, for Uzbekistan, Chabahar is the shortest route to the sea. And Uzbekistan is willing to build rail links across Afghanistan to link up with the north of Iran in order to take advantage of the North-South transport corridor. Look at Turkmenistan. Turkmenistan's shortest route to the sea is Chabahar again. So we have complementarities of interest, both economic and strategic, with Central Asia, which we should take advantage of in order to promote our interests there. Yes, this is again this. And Central Asia has itself developed a very elaborate transit agreement system which India can link into. The Ashgabat Agreement, which India now is part of. If you see this network of interlinkages, it is something that can be of tremendous use to us. One last word about Central Asia before I throw it open. Please look at this, which you must have seen in various previous lectures. This is the Belt and Road, the Silk Road Economic Belt, the land segment of the Belt and Road Initiative, which China has launched. Now, the Belt and Road Initiative is basically an initiative which enables China's economic outreach across Central Asia and across Russia into Europe. But the Belt and Road Initiative is an initiative of China, by China, and for China. It doesn't benefit other people. But if you look at our connectivity links, if you look at what the North-South transport corridor does, it basically opens up the same route to South Asia, Southeast Asia, East Asia. So really speaking, you're not railing against the BRI, but you're providing a lot of people an alternative to the BRI, which eventually links up to the BRI connection to Europe. So if you look at it in strategic terms, and this is important to look at it in strategic terms, because this is what should be an arguing point with the Americans to let you operate through Iran, even in their present situation. The Americans' quarrel with Iran is with the present leadership of Iran. But if you look at it from a strategic perspective, America also wants to access Central Asia without having to go through Russia. One of their objectives is trying to wean the Central Asians away from Russia. America wants to access Afghanistan, not necessarily only through Pakistan. Again, the North-South transport corridor. So North-South transport corridors provide strategic opportunities, not just for India and not just for Central Asia, but for a number of other countries. And therefore, I think that is something that we may be able to eventually succeed in implementing. So that's basically, I want to stop there because I want to react to questions or comments that people make. Thank you.
Yep.